August 19, 1942. 24,000 feet above the French coast, south of Dieppe. The thin air whistles against the canopy of Flight Lieutenant James Calder's Spitfire as the engine note hardens into a fierce metallic growl. The sky is cold and sharp, the sunlight pale, the channel below faint and colorless. His oxygen mask presses tight against his cheek as he draws steady breaths, watching vapor flicker at the corners of his cockpit glass. Calder's gloved hand tightens on the control column. The new Merlin 61 hums with a precision he has never felt before. The vibration is smoother, the thrust more urgent, the power rising even at this altitude where older Spitfires gasped for air. His squadron, number 64, spreads loosely around him in climbing formation, contrails stretching like thin chalk lines behind their wings. Above them, small black specks move fast and fluid. FW-190s. The same fighters that for months had mauled RAF squadrons with brutal ease. The same machines that had outclimbed, outrolled, and outaccelerated every Spitfire thrown at them. German pilots boasted openly that the British had nothing left to match them. Calder steadies his heartbeat as the radio crackles in his headset. Red 1. Bandits high 2 o'clock. Closing fast. He banks gently, feeling the new engine hold its torque with effortless strength. He remembers briefings where intelligence officers spoke with tired faces. The FW-190's arrival in 1941 had been catastrophic. Squadrons flying Spitfire Mk IX were outclassed in nearly every regime. The Luftwaffe struck coastal towns and airfields with frightening boldness. Veteran RAF pilots were shot from the sky by younger Jagdgeschwader aces who treated the air war as if it were settled. Everything changed when test units received the first Merlin 61 prototypes earlier that year. A two-stage supercharger, higher critical altitude, sharply improved climb rate. Engineers whispered that it could outperform the FW-190 above 20,000 feet. But today would be the first real test. The first time Calder's squadron would take the new Mk IX into a full engagement. The FW-190s descend in a shallow dive. Their radial engines glint in the sun, round noses shimmering. Calder feels the old instinctive dread the RAF had learned the hard way. The German fighters are coming in fast, confident, expecting another easy kill. Red Leader's voice cuts across the intercom. Hold your climb. Do not brake. Let them come in. Calder swallows dry air. The oxygen line hisses faintly. He adjusts the trim and keeps the nose slightly high. The Merlin 61 responds with a smooth surge, holding power even as the altitude increases. His canopy frame vibrates with a deep mechanical rhythm. Then the sky erupts. The first pair of FW-190s slash through the formation. Tracer streaks past Calder's left wing. He jerks the stick, rolls hard right, and pulls up into a steep climbing turn. The G-force presses him into his seat, his vision tightening, but the engine does not falter. The Spitfire keeps rising, with an authority he has never felt before. He sees an FW-190 slicing upward after him. Typical German tactic. Climb to match, roll over the top, drop back into firing position. Against the MKV, it always worked. Not today. Calder pushes the throttle forward. The Merlin 61 roars, its supercharger screaming faintly through the cockpit insulation. The Spitfire leaps upward with a sudden burst of acceleration that startles him. The airframe shudders slightly as it claws through thinner air, but it keeps climbing. The FW-190 behind him begins to fall away. Calder's eyes widen. The German pilot expected to gain. Instead, he is losing altitude relative to his prey. The Spitfire is walking away from him, climbing like a machine possessed. Calder rolls over the top, reverses hard, and drops down behind the FW-190. The sudden shift in control is smooth, immediate. He feels a surge of adrenaline as the German fills his gun sight, his wings rocking as he realizes too late that the British fighter is no longer the same opponent. Calder squeezes the trigger. A burst of 20mm fire rips through the FW-190's right wing root. Metal fragments scatter. A thin trail of smoke begins to drift from the fuselage. The German pilot dives, desperate to escape, but the Spitfire stays tight on his tail, its newfound power letting Calder hold the pursuit even as they drop back toward denser air. For the first time in months, Calder senses fear in the enemy's movement. The balance has shifted. The RAF finally has a machine that can fight back. For the first time in months, Calder senses fear in the enemy's movement. The balance has shifted. The RAF finally has a machine that can fight back. Weeks earlier, before any frontline pilot felt the lift of the Merlin 61 at altitude, the mood at the Supermarine Works in Southampton had been grim. Engineers moved through dimly lit hangars lined with wounded Spitfires returning from the Channel front. Bullet holes riddled their wings. Some arrived with scorched paint and buckled exhaust stacks. Ground crews whispered that the Luftwaffe's new fighter was unstoppable. Pilots flying Mach Vs described the same nightmare again and again. The FW-190 would climb away with ease, then swoop down in a rolling attack that no British fighter could match. At Rolls-Royce's Derby facility, the crisis sparked a race against physics itself. The Merlin 45, powering the early Spitfires, had reached its limits. Engineers, led by Stanley Hooker, pushed deeper into the two-stage supercharger design that had been tested in secrecy. The concept was elegant but demanding. Compress air once, cool it, compress it again, then feed the engine with oxygen-rich pressure even at high altitude. If it worked, the engine would breathe freely where every German fighter began to starve. On a biting February morning in 1942, test pilot Ronald Thomas took a prototype Mk IX, fitted with the Merlin 61, into the sky. The aircraft climbed with a force he had not anticipated. The nose lifted with steady confidence past 20,000 feet, then 25, then 30. The altimeter needle turned as if freed from friction. At that height, even the feared FW-190A struggled to maintain energy. Thomas reduced throttle, feeling the smooth response through his seat and control column. No coughing. No loss of power. He leveled out at 32,000 feet and let out a quiet breath inside his oxygen mask. Down below, Derby's buildings faded into a pale patchwork. The Spitfire wasn't gasping or trembling against thin air. It felt alive. Reports from the flight tests spread quickly through the Air Ministry. The aircraft could climb at over 4,000 feet per minute at medium altitude. It maintained strong performance above 30,000 feet, and its top speed surpassed the FW-190 by a margin that widened as altitude increased. There was no time to celebrate. Commanders needed the engine in the field. Now. Supermarine made the decision to convert existing Spitfire Mk airframes into Mk IX rather than wait for a new production run. The modifications were rough in places. Some fuselages were reinforced hastily. Armor plates were bolted in with minimal refinements. But every engineer understood the stakes. The Channel front was slipping away. RAF squadrons needed a fighter that could meet the FW-190 on equal terms. By June 1942, the first operational Mk IX reached No. 64 and No. 6 and 11 squadrons. Pilots examined the new machines on the tarmac at Hornchurch and Kenley. The sleek nose looked familiar, yet subtly different. The two-stage supercharger bulged beneath the cowling. Mechanics warned that the engine was temperamental during servicing. But in the air, it was a weapon the RAF had prayed for. Calder remembered the briefing on his squadron's first day with Mk IX. The operations room buzzed with tension as the intelligence officer spread aerial photographs across the table. He tapped one with a blunt finger. FD-190s have been patrolling at altitudes we've struggled to reach. This new aircraft changes that. You'll maintain climb profiles that were impossible in the MKV. Stay high. Force them to fight where they don't expect you. Beside him, Sergeant Peter Langford muttered under his breath. Let's see how the bastards like facing something that climbs. The room filled with an uncomfortable mix of hope and disbelief. They had heard promises before. But as pilots took the Mk IX up on practice climbs, skepticism dissolved. The throttle responded with a rising surge that felt almost unnatural. The aircraft accelerated even in steep angles that previously caused a stall warning horn to chirp. At 27,000 feet, Langford's excited voice crackled over the radio. This thing pulls like a fresh engine at sea level. How in God's name did they manage this? Calder grinned inside his mask. It felt as if the Spitfire had been reborn. Only days later, orders came for the first combat sortie using the new variant. The Luftwaffe was preparing another high-altitude sweep over the French coast. The RAF intended to meet them head-on. The squadron launched in loose formation, climbing steadily toward the coastline. As they crossed the channel, Calder watched the altimeter creep upward with unwavering authority. By the time they reached 24,000 feet, the Merlin 61 still had more to give. And waiting beyond the thin haze over Dieppe were the familiar shark-like silhouettes of the FW-190s, descending with the same arrogance that had ruled the last year of air combat in the West. But this time, the RAF carried something new. Calder feels the Merlin 61 surging beneath him as the Spitfires level off at the edge of a thin, icy cloud layer. The squadron forms a broad arc, climbing slightly, each pilot adjusting trim and throttle with practiced ease. The air is smooth but tense, like the calm before a storm. The channel glimmers far below through silver mist. Ahead, sunlight flashes off dark wings. The FW-190s rise from the coastal haze in a loose climbing formation of their own. Their radial engines give them a squat, muscular look. German pilots fly with confident precision, their movements suggesting a familiar pattern. Identify the British fighters, climb above them, use altitude to dictate the fight. For months, this tactic had been nearly impossible to counter. The MKVs simply could not match the German climb rate. Squadrons were forced into defensive spirals that bled energy and invited disaster. The German commander leading today's sweep, Oberleutnant Victor Mertens of Jagdgeschwader 26, watches the ascending shapes of Calder's squadron with casual curiosity. The silhouettes look no different from the Spitfires they have toyed with for a year. Mertens keys his mic. Maintain altitude advantage. They cannot hold the climb. We push them down and break them at 17,000. His wingman, Feldwebel Jonas Kramer, chuckles through the static. Another half hour of herding sheep. Calder does not hear their confidence, but he sees it in the way the FW-190s fan out, preparing to roll over the top of the RAF formation. He tightens his harness, checks his oxygen flow, and glances at his wingman, Langford, whose canopy glints in the sunlight. Red Leader's voice steadies the moment. Stay with the climb. Do not drop. Make them commit. The Germans commit first. 3 FW-190s break formation and dive. Their wings flash silver as they accelerate, dropping toward the highest arc of the RAF line. Calder watches them descend, their attack angle confident and shallow. It is the same maneuver that once shattered Spitfire formations like glass. His pulse beats faster. Every instinct tells him to brake, dive, run. But the Mk IX holds steady. The first Fu-90 rips past, its cannons spitting a burst that slices through empty sky inches from Langford's left wingtip. Calder pulls gently into a climbing roll, matching the Germans' overshoot. The Merlin 61 growls, holding thrust even as the Spitfire climbs into thinner air. Mertens narrows his eyes as he watches the British fighters maneuver. Something is wrong. They are not dropping. They are not struggling to maintain altitude. They are rising. Kramer's voice cracks sharply through the German frequency. They are still climbing. They should be stalling up here. Mertens snaps a command. Increase climb angle. Regain altitude immediately. But it is too late. Calder sees Mertens' F-190 attempting to power upward, nose lifting sharply. The German engine roars, but the climb is sluggish. The aircraft shudders at the edge of its ceiling performance. Calder's Spitfire, by contrast, surges. The Merlin 61 hurls him upward with a clean, relentless pull. He rises above Mertens in seconds, the sunlight flooding his canopy. For a brief moment, he sees the German pilot's helmet through the canopy below, head turned upward in surprise. Calder pushes the stick forward. The Spitfire drops into a diving turn behind Mertens. The G-force tightens the muscles in his neck. The gun sight sweeps across the German's tail. Calder waits for the wings to align, steadies his breathing, then fires a burst. Cannon shells strike the F-190's tailplane, sending splinters of metal twisting into the slipstream. Mertens banks violently, trailing a thin line of smoke. Kramer dives in to cover him, but Langford appears from the sun, the new Spitfire climbing with predatory ease. The German radio erupts with confusion. They are faster at altitude. They are outclimbing us. This is not the MAKV. Something is different. Calder weaves through the turning fight, the Spitfire responding with sharp precision. He feels none of the old limitations. No loss of power, no desperate stall buffet. The aircraft holds energy like a machine born for the heights. The FW-190s try to disengage, rolling into defensive spirals. But the patterns they used to dominate the channel front no longer work. The Mk IX stays glued to their tails, climbing through their escape angles, turning inside their arcs, refusing to let them slip away. Mertens, still trailing smoke, dives toward the coast. His wingman follows, covering him, both Germans fleeing in a straight descent meant to leverage their superior roll rate and dive speed. But Calder and Langford remain behind them, refusing to give ground. The Mk IX's nose cuts cleanly through the air. The Germans cannot widen the gap. For the first time since the Fw-190 entered the war, British fighters are holding the pursuit. Down below, the French coastline grows sharper. White surf outlines the beaches. The Germans race for safety. Calder does not know it yet, but the message sent today will echo through every Luftwaffe ready room from Abbeville to Saint-Omer. The RAF has found a machine that can hunt them at altitude. Calder keeps the nose of his Spitfire pointed at the shrinking shapes of Mertens and Kramer. The air is cold enough that frost begins to form in tiny feathers along the cockpit frame. The Merlin 61 thrums with steady force. Every vibration feels sharp, deliberate, precise. The altimeter unwinds as they descend in pursuit, but the Germans have not gained the distance they usually enjoyed. The coastline rises fast, chalk cliffs glowing under a pale sun. Below, scattered fields and roads stretch inland beneath a thin morning haze. Calder watches the exhaust smoke trailing from Mertens' aircraft whip into the slipstream. The German is running, diving, doing everything an F-190 is built to do. But the Mk IX remains behind him, holding the line, refusing to yield. Langford's voice cuts in through the radio, breathless and tight. "They can't drop us. I don't believe it. Stay with them, James." Calder pushes the throttle until it nudges the gate. The engine's pitch shifts into a strained, powerful growl. The airframe quivers as they dive deeper. Kramer tries to roll violently left, hoping to shake Langford off his tail. The maneuver would have ripped a MKV out of energy. But Langford's Spitfire snaps through the turn with a crisp, predatory motion. He sticks to Kramer like a shadow. Ahead, Mertens realizes his wingman is moments from being outflanked. He banks sharply, climbing again, attempting to force an overshoot. Calder follows him up the slope of sky, watching the sun's glare spill across his gun sight. The altimeter steadies. They are leveling off near 21,000 feet. A risky place for an FW-190 to fight a Mk IX. Calder feels his heart punching against his ribs. His oxygen mask tastes metallic. He sees the German beginning a barrel roll, trying to shake him, using that famously powerful aileron authority. But this time, as the FW-190 flicks into the roll, the Spitfire remains locked behind him, bending smoothly through the same maneuver. Calder whispers to himself through the hiss of his oxygen line. Not today. He steadies his aim. The German arcs into view for a heartbeat. Calder squeezes the trigger. A burst of cannon shells streaks across open air and rakes the FW-190's left wingtip. The round tears a fragment of metal free, spinning it into the slipstream. Mertens jerks the stick, barely maintaining control. Below them, Kramer tries to reverse the tide, rolling in behind Langford. His tracers streak past the Spitfire's tail. Langford pulls into a sudden climb, forcing Kramer to follow. The German cannot hold the ascent. The moment his climb weakens, Langford rolls over the top, dropping behind him. Their voices collide over the British frequency. "I've got him turning. Stay with it." He's bleeding energy. Calder sees Kramer's FW-190 attempting a desperate brake turn. Langford's rounds strike home. The impact flashes along the German fuselage. A plume of gray smoke erupts. Kramer's canopy wobbles in the dive. Then the aircraft slips past the edge of control, spiraling out in a smoking arc toward the countryside below. For a heartbeat, everything in the sky feels still. Mertens hears Kramer shout something unintelligible before his voice vanishes from the Luftwaffe channel. The German commander looks over his shoulder, sees the empty space where his wingman should be, and feels the first ember of fear. He banks sharply, trying to escape toward the inland airfields. But Calder and Langford are no longer reacting. They are hunting. Calder shifts in behind Mertens again. The German's aircraft is wounded, but still flying hard. He dives toward lower altitude where the FW-190's performance might give him a final edge. Calder follows relentlessly. The landscape grows larger, more detailed. Trees and villages begin to take shape. The enemy pilot cannot outrun him. He knows it. Calder sees the FW-190 jinking left and right, trying to force a mistake. Calder stays tight, patient, steady. Mertens finally tries the last tactic left. A rolling scissors, tight and punishing, meant to force the pursuer to overshoot. The maneuver is sharp, violent, expertly executed. But the Mk IX holds the line. Calder matches each roll with calm precision. The Merlin 61 hums cleanly. The Spitfire's nose remains pointed where it matters most. The German's energy bleeds away. Calder finds the shot. He fires a final burst. Cannon shells rip through the FW-190's fuselage. Smoke pours from the engine cowling. Mertens tries to bail out, but the aircraft is already tumbling, smoke trailing in a long ribbon as it plunges toward a distant field. Calder levels off and finally exhales. In that moment, far above the fields of northern France, a truth settles across the sky. The age of German high-altitude dominance is ending. Calder circles once above the patchwork fields, gaining altitude with a light pull on the stick. The Spitfire responds instantly, almost eager to rise again. Wind hums across the canopy as he scans the sky for threats. Nothing moves now but faint contrails dissolving in the upper air. Langford climbs to join him, his breathing steadying on the radio. "That's it for them today, James." Calder nods, though Langford cannot see it. Below, a thin plume of smoke marks the field where Mertens went down. Somewhere farther inland, the wreck of Kramer's machine is burning quietly in a line of trees. The Luftwaffe will send recovery teams later, but the message is already delivered. This sky is no longer theirs. The squadron regroups in a loose formation and turns back toward the channel. As they climb over the coastline, the cold air sharpens again, the sea widening into a steel-blue expanse beneath them. The Merlin 61 maintains its steady rhythm, each beat of the engine a reminder of the transformation unfolding across the Western Front. By the time the Spitfire descend toward Hornchurch, the ground crews are already waiting. The wheels touch down with short bounces. Mechanics swarm the aircraft, hands running along wing roots and exhaust manifolds, listening for the smallest irregularity. One fitter pats the side of Calder's machine with quiet approval. "She sounds healthy, sir." Calder removes his helmet, running a hand through damp hair. Exhaustion settles in his limbs, but beneath it lies something bright and unmistakable. Relief. Confidence. The heavy weight that had shadowed every RAF pilot since the F-190 first appeared is finally lifting. Inside the debriefing room, maps lie open beneath the harsh electric lights. Intelligence officers take notes as Calder and Langford describe the engagement. A young clerk looks up with disbelief. "You held the climb against Focke-Wulf's?" Langford replies with a grin too tired to hide. "We did more than hold it. Within days, word of the new Spitfire spreads across the channel. Luftwaffe pilots begin returning from sorties with troubling reports. British fighters climbing past 22,000 with no drop in power. Spitfires pursuing through vertical maneuvers once thought impossible. Climb angles that match or exceed the FW-190A. At Jagdgeschwader 26's airfields, mechanics gather in clumps near flight lines, speaking in low tones. Some believe a few elite RAF squadrons simply have upgraded engines. Others think entirely new Spitfire models have arrived. Rumors ripple through ready rooms at Abbeville, Saint-Omer, and Lille. One captain mutters as he studies reconnaissance photos spread across a table. "Look at the air intakes here. This isn't the Mk V. They've brought something new." A veteran ace, Hauptmann Franz Keller, taps an oil-stained finger against the photograph. "If they can climb with us at altitude, we lose our advantage. And if we lose that, we lose the initiative." Up and down the Channel front, tactics begin to shift. German pilots avoid high-altitude sweeps unless absolutely necessary. The energy-dominant rolling attacks become more cautious, less certain. Commanders warn their squadrons, if the new Spitfire climbs, disengage early. Do not let them take the high position. On the British side, RAF Fighter Command adjusts its doctrine almost overnight. Squadrons equipped with Mk IXs are sent to intercept high-altitude raids, while Mk Vs are reassigned to lower-level operations. The effect is immediate and unmistakable. German bomber formations begin losing fighters before they can form defensive stacks. Intercepted F-190s find themselves outclimbed in engagements they once dictated alone. The Luftwaffe's aura of invincibility cracks. Through the autumn of 1942 and into the early months of 1943, the Spitfire Mk IX becomes the spear point of British air power. It escorts bombers deeper into the continent. It patrols the Channel with renewed aggression. It rises to meet reconnaissance aircraft that once flew unchallenged. Calder continues flying through the bitter winter months, each sortie reinforcing the same truth. The Mk IX has reclaimed the altitude band that once seemed lost forever. He feels it in the smooth pull of the engine at 30,000 feet, in the way German fighters hesitate to press their advantage, in the rhythm of aerial combat slowly turning in the RAF's favor. By early 1943, even German intelligence reports acknowledge what pilots have been saying for months. The British have produced a fighter capable of matching and surpassing the FW-190 at altitude. The Merlin 61 has done more than power a new aircraft. It has rewritten the balance of the air war. Calder stands outside his aircraft after another successful sortie in March 1943. The wind cutting across the airfield, the low sun painting the sky in bands of orange and gray. He listens to the ticking of the cooling engine and rests a hand against the warm metal of the cowling. He thinks of the months before the Mk IX arrived. The hopeless climbs, the desperate dives, the feeling of fighting an enemy who always seemed to hold the higher ground. That world is gone now. The engineers who built the engine may never fly it in combat. But their creation has reshaped the sky. The Merlin-powered Spitfire has broken the FW-190's dominance and given the RAF what it needed most: the ability to fight at altitude again. Calder turns away from the aircraft as ground crews move in for inspection. The war is far from over, but the horizon feels different now. Brighter, the air less suffocating. He walks toward the operations hut, already hearing the call for the next briefing. The Spitfire Mk IX will carry him there, and the sky above Europe will never again belong solely to the Luftwaffe.